Prince, let me know if I'm in the box. We are live and we are broadcasting today, sir, from YouTube channel. Because, you know, there is new restrictions on Facebook.
Yes.
That you cannot let a live stream stay for more than 30 days.
Right,
so we're trying a different system.
Okay.
Today, the goal is talk about immigration, immigration laws, and the complexity of those laws. Lots of American people, because they have never been involved in immigration issues, they have no idea of what is involved in order to come to the United States legally. I strongly believe that anyone who had an option to come here legally through regular channels would be walking thousands of miles to enter the country. What is your take on that, sir?
Well, of course, how we define legal or legal immigration is something that has changed over time. That one often hears the rationale that, you know, well, my grandparents came to this country legally and so should everyone else. Now, my question, first of all, was how do we know that? I mean, my grandparents came to this country in the 1920s, and I can't speak for the legality of how they came over or if it wasn't in violation of some statute that existed at the time. And also, we might be, or there might be a tendency to apply today's standards to the 1920s or 30s when our grandparents came over. Now, it's, I think what we have to remember, and this is something that we've discussed in the past, and it was central to my congressional campaign in 2012, that before there can be any serious discussion or any well-meaning discussion around the issue of immigration, it's our foreign policy that has to be re-examined, because during the Cold War, much was made of refugees from communist countries, but what we're seeing, especially coming out of Latin America, these are refugees from capitalism or the Washington Consensus, IMF laws, death squad economies, death squad capitalism. This is what people are fleeing. And this is what is largely unknown to the American people. And what's more, now we have ICE and ICE raids, which have become central to news reportage. And what it amounts to is an attack on the working class, because we're also a culture, or we're socialized into this culture of false consciousness that we don't, and when I say we, I mean the working class, that there is little, if any, social solidarity. People have a tendency to believe that they have more in common with those who are exploiting than with other members of the working class. And what Americans don't realize is that the bigger the working class, the more power they have. And that has always been problematic in terms of class relations, that the working class is largely unaware of its own political empowerment. And that is the reason why immigrants are being demonized, and not to focus too much on Trump's terminology or his lexicon that they're poisoning our blood. I mean, that's reminiscent of another era in history that I don't even want to talk about. But it's there is a decided difference between social cohesion on the one hand and social solidarity. And social cohesion, how that is ensured, is through an enemy image, an external threat. If it's not a Saddam Hussein or an Osama bin Laden or a Putin, then we use immigration or immigrants, and that immigration is characterized not as a human hemorrhage of refugees, but rather as an invasion. So here too, it's a socialization that seeks to divide people, a people who are already largely unaware of their own class empowerment.
Now, lots of people are under the wrong impression that liberal folks, people on the Democratic Party, are in favor of open borders. I tell people all the time, no, that's not the case. No one is suggesting that the border should be totally open and let anyone who comes in allowed to come in. No one is saying that if you are a violent criminal, that you should not be deported. We all agree that violent criminals should be deported, especially if they are here in the country illegally. You want to talk about?
Okay, well, if they are violent criminals and they have committed violent crimes while here in the U.S., then certainly they should be brought to justice and incarcerated, and then returned to their countries of origin. I don't think anyone disputes that. And of course, if they are or were violent criminals or criminals of any description in their countries of origin, well, how do we know that, first of all? But then again, we have to look at what I don't want to say even our government, but our national security apparatus, our CIA, our military, what they are doing in countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, which by any conceivable international standard is illegal. And I made reference a few minutes ago to death squad economies, and that is what the U.S. does. And again, I hate to say the U.S. because I don't want anything that I say here to carry the implication that this is coming from the American people. It is not. We are not responsible for it. It is they, and by they I mean our military, our CIA, the School of the Americas. If anyone is, I'll just quickly explain for your audience who the School of the Americas are. They are a training institute to which Latin American military personnel are sent for training in the art of torture, political assassination, you name it. And of course, I believe it was in 2000 how the military responded to calls for closure of that institute was simply by changing its name. Now it's the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, but it's the same crime. So in terms of legality, let's take a look at that and let's understand what it is that people are fleeing and coming here, and then of course they are viewed or characterized as illegal or as constituting an invasion of some kind. So again, it redounds to the same point that I've made. It's we have to look at our foreign policy. We have to look at, and not just in Latin America, this is true of the Far East and West Africa as well, but primarily Latin America. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. And I'm sorry that if you see me here, but I'm trying to engage. You understand?
Yes, I do.
Now, Professor, impacts, okay? A lot of people say, well, we need those jobs. American people need those jobs that perhaps undocumented immigrants are doing. And when I'm talking about undocumented immigrants, I'm talking about those that are here respecting the laws of the land, that perhaps the only illegality that they committed was trying to escape a country where they were to come to the country who advertises itself as the land of the free.
And it might seem ironic too that they're taking both economic and political refuge in the very country whose government is imposing the conditions from which they are now trying to emerge or flee. But as far as taking our jobs, I think it is generally agreed that those whom some would characterize as illegal are doing the kinds of jobs that you or I would probably not want to do.
Wouldn't do it.
And that only goes to show. I mean, it makes nonsense of the contention that they're coming here and doing nothing or something, that they want everything for free, whatever the hell that means. But they are working, they are contributing, and they're not taking jobs that might otherwise have gone to those who are here legally. They're doing the kinds of jobs that nobody would want to do typically.
Well, Professor, many years ago, I used to have a cleaning service. And what we did was, after working hours, we went to banks, clean up banks. We went to supermarkets, we cleaned up supermarkets. In all those years that I did that, I never had one American citizen, natural born in the United States, applying for those jobs. 99.999 of those people that I hired that worked for me back in those days were immigrants. I don't know if they were legal or illegal back then. Maybe the laws were a little different, but those were people that worked very hard and definitely not criminals. People that did the work.
Right.
That many Americans and legal people did not want to do. If you go to the restaurants, probably most of the people working in the kitchen are not legal status. I'm not saying all, I'm saying many of them. What would happen to our economy if we were to deport every single undocumented back to the country of origin?
Well, I don't know if I can contemplate what would happen if each and every so-called illegal was deported, but I would imagine it would have very serious and very difficult economic and social implications, consequences. It's really hard to say, but there would be essentially no one or very few to do the types of work you were just describing in restaurants, in cleaning services, gardening, painting, and so forth. I mean, it's a fair question. Who would do that?
Who would work from 6 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon, picking up strawberries, lettuce, tomatoes on a field somewhere in California?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
for $50 a day.
Right. I mean, we're posing that as a rhetorical question, but it's a serious question all the same. I mean, I know I, for example, could not do that. There's nothing wrong with getting up at that hour. Let me be clear about that. I mean, it's not something that most Americans would seek to do.
Exactly. But if that was to happen, of course, this is just a rhetoric question, but we need to understand the full impact. Because right now we talk about things are very expensive. A gallon of milk is this much, a dozen of eggs is this much. But if undocumented were to be deported, I cannot imagine how the prices would be if they had to pay an American citizen $20 or $22 an hour to do the same work that somebody else is doing for $5 or $6 an hour.
And not to mention, the workers you're describing, they are generating an income, hence buying power. So how is that bad for the economy? I don't see how it would be, because when you have more buying power, people are buying eggs and milk and other things that whether they are necessities or luxuries, but it creates, again, I'll use the phrase buying power.
A lot of
you
Americans
have more dollars out there chasing whatever is.
Many Americans think that because you hear undocumented, you pay no taxes. I know many who work and pay taxes.
Right.
They never will be collecting from those taxes. Yeah. But they do pay taxes.
They do pay taxes, and legend to the contrary, they're not here looking for everything for free, whatever that means. No, on the contrary, they're working. They are contributing, just as our grandparents did. But of course, now there is that idiosyncratic distinction that is made, well, legal versus illegal, and how my grandparents came here. And again, not that we really can make informed statements about how our grandparents arrived or what the laws were at the time, because so I think even that's not an entirely informed comparison when one hears it.
Yeah, one of the things that I hear many Americans born in the United States say is, well, if my family came legally, why can they come legally?
And what does that mean? I mean,
what does that?
Yeah, again, we can quibble over the semantics of legal versus illegal, and what was illegal 100 years ago versus what is illegal now. But even more significant, we have to consider the circumstances and the conditions from which people are trying to emerge or trying to, well, flee, quite literally. I mean, what was it that drove my grandparents from Italy and into the United States back in the 1920s? I can't say for sure. Again, I cannot make an informed judgment. It was a whole 40 years before I was born. So we have to consider, what is it that drives people from their countries of origin, and in many cases, to the very country whose government is imposing the conditions from which they are trying to emerge. But I mean, there are many factors to be considered, and not just, pardon the cliche, paint everybody with a broad brush. I mean, we're really, I think there's a tendency, you know, in American culture just to be too inclusive, you know, over whom we characterize as illegal or.
Yes, and undocumented people have rights.
Yes.
Lots of folks think that because you are here undocumented or not in status, that you have no rights. You are a very highly intelligent person. You are a professor, and you understand much better about this than probably I do. Does everyone in the country has a constitutional right, sir?
Sorry, we're being,
Constitutional right.
constitutional right and a right as a human being. I mean, there are legal rights, constitutional rights, there are human rights. So yes, I mean, these people have rights, and even if one is not a desirable as, you know, as the U.S. or U.S. culture might define it, they still have rights, and they are entitled to due process. But it's really a false characterization to say that they're lazy, that they want to live here free, or they want everything for free, which is, you know, another grammatical issue. But that's, but it's, and then of course the notion that they're bringing drugs or illicit drugs, fentanyl, one often hears, and that could be true of some, but I think we would all agree that that's hardly a majority or even a significant minority, you know, who are bringing illicit drugs into the United States. But at the risk of sounding overly esoteric, there too we can look at what our own government, or more specifically our CIA, has done. I mean, our CIA has been trafficking in drugs since before it was the CIA, when it was still the OSS under the single most evil figure in U.S. history. I'm referring to Allen Dulles. There, I said it. I mean, that's how far back our government, or more specifically our national security apparatus, has been involved in drug trafficking. So that just, I mean, even if it can be suggested that some are somehow ferrying illegal drugs into the United States, I mean, well, let's look at that also. I mean, how our own government, and lest this sound like conspiracy theory or whatever you want to call it, John Kerry, if you remember John Kerry, he was Secretary of State under Barack Obama. He was a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, and he was the Democratic nominee for president in 2004. He presided over a Senate committee, and this was their very finding. So, you know, far from being conspiracy theory or something, you know, licentiously conspiratorial, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, these are matters not only of public record, historical record, but even congressional record. I mean, I'll just name 3 agency operations: Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I mean, and which that perhaps takes us to, as you may have read, ICE, or so the story goes, is now monitoring our social media activity. You know, that, for, you know, if one were to utter anything unfavorable about ICE and about U.S. policy, that, you know, that we will now be under some kind of surveillance. So I don't doubt that if I'm not under some kind of government surveillance already, I probably am now for certain, having just said what I've said about the CIA. But I stand by that.
But, you know, maybe that's the old CIA. The new CIA is a whole different thing, at least according to the current president. He's redoing this.
Okay. Well, if the current president said it, well, he wouldn't lie to us now.
No.
I'm kidding.
He would never lie to us.
Yeah. He's, you know.
Look.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't mean to become facetious here.
But you know, sir, a lot of the things that we are seeing, a lot of the things that the migrants are trying to escape from,
right,
are situations or impact of decisions made by United States in those countries.
Right.
They are now feeling the impact, and they're trying to escape. And where do they want to go? They want to go to the country that says this is the land of the free, this is,
Right, and because we have certain democratic institutions here in the U.S. that have enabled us to advance ourselves somewhat, underscore somewhat, as a working class. I mean, we do have democratic rights. Obviously, they're going to flee their countries of origin. I mean, not to mention the geographic proximity too. I mean, if we were on the other side of the world, chances are we wouldn't have such an influx, or what some call an invasion. I don't call it that, but it's the geographic proximity also. But yes, these are ultimately the results of our government's policy. And if, again, I'll give some examples for your audience, that whenever any type of social or political movement in Latin America, elsewhere too, but let's focus on Latin America, whenever any social movement has emerged that has sought to do something for the majority population, the U.S. has gone in there and smashed it, whether covertly or overtly. We're talking the invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965, multiple invasions of Haiti, most recently in 1994, covert assassinations, Salvador Allende, the most notorious instance perhaps. Evo Morales was overthrown. And then, of course, in 2004, the attempted overthrow of Hugo Chavez. Now, these, incidentally, are not socialist countries in every sense. I mean, there's this tendency to respond with, well, they're communists, or they're pardon the expression, commie bastards, or another Cuba is going to emerge, or some such thing. But let's take the example of Venezuela in particular, that unlike Cuba, capitalism has never had it better, just that the oil is under public control, and that is what is problematic for the United States, that the oil corporations cannot get their hands on the oil in Venezuela, which was discovered in approximately 1917, 1918, and that has been the source of discomfiture, so to speak, between the two countries. But in the case, in particular, of Hugo Chavez, he was overthrown in a CIA coup in 2004. The claim was that he had resigned, but he had been kidnapped. And the people of Venezuela, they had seen this unfold before, not in their own countries necessarily, but elsewhere in Latin America, and they weren't buying it for a moment. They knew precisely what was going on. They took to the streets. They surrounded Miraflores, the presidential palace, hundreds of thousands of people, and they demanded the return of their president, and he was returned. So that also underscores what social solidarity, what people power can do. I mean, here their president was removed, they weren't having it. And similarly in the Dominican Republic, when public action threatened the return of Juan Bosch, who was desired by the Dominican people, how did the U.S. respond? By invading that country outright. So just to give a few examples of how U.S. policy is the reason for this, again, I'll use the term human hemorrhage of economic refugees, that this is not an invasion, and these people are not, I mean, these people just want to survive. They are not here to start crime or distribute drugs or poison our blood or whatever characterization, whatever moronic characterization we want to use. I mean, these are human beings who are struggling to survive, and they're not taking our jobs, and they certainly don't want everything free, whatever that even means. So it's really, again, there's no social solidarity in this country, sadly. You know, we may think there is, but there's, I think, a tendency to mistake or to confuse social control or social cohesion on the one hand with social solidarity on the other. That there's this individualism that has imbued our ideology, and I think what it would take is for full exposure of what the U.S. is doing in Latin American countries, and even then, who knows? But I mean, it would take at least that for people to finally understand what the realities are.
Professor, if you had a conversation, let's just rewind the tape of your life,
Okay.
50, 60 years back, and you sitting on the table talking to your mom and dad, uncle, grandfather, and they were envisioning United States 67 years in the future. Would this be what they saw?
In other words, would my parents, grandparents, what is happening now, would that have been their vision at the
Yeah.
time? Oh, that's really hard to say. I know, well,
What do you think? Of course, you cannot say exactly, but
yeah.
what do you think?
Let me speak for my mother, and she's been gone for almost 4 years, but she was a professor also. She taught Spanish at the College of New Rochelle for 32 years. Prior to that, she lived in Cuba on a Fulbright scholarship, and she taught at the University of Havana. And this was in 1955, 1956. The revolution was well underway. It was the attack on the Moncada barracks, that was 1953. So she was there amid the revolution, and she saw the conditions under which the Cuban people were living at the time, and she understood perfectly well why there was a revolution going on. So she never took a hostile view of the revolutionary government in Cuba. Yeah, yes, I mean, tactical differences, I mean, critiques as one might make of his or her own government, but she understood what was happening there, that it was a corrupt fascist regime that the people took action and overthrew. Now, we can debate whether the Castro regime was better than the Batista regime. I'm not going to address that. Many things do speak for themselves in that regard, but I think if I were to wonder or to consider how my mother in particular might be responding to all that's going on, I don't think any of this would surprise her. My father, it's more difficult to tell because he was not quite as politically progressive. He was a Democrat also. He was a Democratic nominee for mayor of Yonkers in 1983. So I mean, he was not conservative as we would define it today. I mean, he was not, again, I'll use the phrase backward, but I don't think he was quite as progressive when it came to matters such as these. I can remember also when I was an undergrad and learning about the Nicaraguan government and what had happened in El Salvador and El Mozote, which was a massacre of 900 people, mostly women and children. I remember his uneasiness, not at the information so much, because he had no reason to dispute that that any of that had happened, but how I was learning this and what I might possibly do with that information, and maybe he was more concerned about my reputation or even my physical safety. So it's really hard to. Now, of course, my wife, for her part, she's keenly aware of all that's happening.
Now, Professor, what suggestion do you have for our undocumented migrants that are out there? Because we all know somebody who is not legal status. I cannot pinpoint person by person, but we all know somebody. What suggestion, recommendation do you have for that person?
For one individual person, I don't know what kind of recommendation I could make that wouldn't amount to legal advice, which I'm not equipped or qualified to provide. But the only solution is just bringing awareness, not of course not to the undocumented immigrants themselves, but just to everyone around us, that they know that there's a greater understanding, and not just repeat the claim that my grandparents came here literally legally, or that one often hears illegal is illegal no matter how you spin it. Well, it's not that simple. So we have to make that departure really from from the oversimplification of this entire issue. So as to the advice I would give one single or even a few who might be considered illegal or undocumented, I don't know what advice I could give. Again, that might put them in even greater jeopardy, because now that would amount to legal advice, perhaps.
Well, the only thing I would tell you guys, the friends or the people I know, and even the people that I do not know that might be out of status, is contact an immigration lawyer, explain your situation, be prepared just in case if you are caught in a raid, who to call, who not to call. Let maybe a family member knows where your documents are, the papers, if you pay taxes, where your pay stubs are. Get any information that you have that might be able to establish that you are not a criminal, that you've been working in the States, you've been respecting and contributing to the country. Get everything that you have together. Okay, get an attorney. They are the people that are aware of the law, that can give you legal advice. I cannot, the professor cannot, but we all know that if you are in risk of being caught in something like this, be prepared. Memorize a number that you might want to call in case if you are taken in. Okay, let me call my wife, let me call my brother. Call somebody. So be prepared.
Okay, can I just add to that?
Yes.
And as is true of any law enforcement officer, ICE agents also will need a warrant to search your premises. So be cooperative, be professional, polite, but do not be intimidated, and don't be taken advantage of, because they'll need a warrant. They can't just march into your house and ransack your furniture looking for illegals. No, they need a warrant.
And you have the right to maintain silence.
Right, that is correct.
Okay. Well, guys, don't forget, we are at Dos Marias here at 200 New Main Street, the best place for a good Mexican food. Come and relax at the end of the day, mix and mingle, have a drink or two.
Yes. Don't drive after
Exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say. One drink or two. Don't have three and then say Yonkers' voice told you could. No,
right.
I'm not saying that.
It's not legal to drink and then have a second and third and then put the car in drive and wait for the house to pull up alongside of you. No, can't do that.
Can't do that. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Professor,
thank you again.
Making yourself available.
And thank you for this opportunity. And yes, I second the endorsement of Dos Marias.
Dos Marias.
It's very good, very good. I mean, I do recommend it.
200 New Main Street, place you can come with your family, because there is a lot of bars, that it's more for single people that go there to meet other people. This is a family-oriented restaurant.
Yes.
You can come with your friends, your wife, your sister, your mom, family-oriented. 2 floors, great ambiance, good drinks, come mix and mingle. We should always have a place in our heart for one more friend.
And parking does not seem to be a problem here either. No,
yeah,
so
we have municipal parking right across the street, one across the street, another one across the street on Main Street.
Yeah.
Parking is not the problem.
Right, and anytime I've come here, I've found space very quickly. So.
Thank you. And guys,
Thank you.
do not forget to stay tuned for our next interview that is coming up at 11 o'clock with Yonkers City Council President Lakeisha Bellamy Collins. She's going to be on, or Collins Bellamy?
Collins Bellamy.
I always mix that. Lakeisha Collins Bellamy, going to be on at 11 a.m. here on Yonkers Voice. Tune in, ask your questions. Yonkers Voice is not my voice. I am not the voice of Yonkers. This is the place where the voice of Yonkers can be heard. Thank you, and until next time.
Okay, thank you.